All right, so it's really happening. Again, the much-anticipated second summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump. The two leaders are set to sit down for dinner Wednesday evening local time before they sit down for their summit on Thursday. And for a closer look at what's to come and what we can expect from the summit, we have with us Dr. Go명현, a research fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies on my right, and our Arirang's presidential office correspondent Hwang Ho-jun on my left. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
All right, so we've been seeing a rather slowed progress over nuclear negotiations between North Korea and the U.S. ever since the Singapore summit. So what concessions do you think are realistic for us to expect from both sides?
Well, the negotiations between the two sides have slowed down since the Singapore summit because the United States tried to impose on North Korea its terms of negotiation, which is not really a negotiation, it's a unilateral concession on the part of North Korea to denuclearize, such as disclosing the full list of nuclear sites and the infrastructure North Korea developed in the last 2 decades, which North Korea didn't take it kindly, obviously. So in that sense, the United States has considered already to North Korea in terms of changing its approach towards negotiations. So before going to this summit in Singapore, United States acknowledged that from now on, the two sides are going to negotiate over the staggered denuclearization process in which there will be a give and take at each stage. And then at the initial stage, the two sides are going to start small, start with a small implementation, small steps, then grow from there. So going into the Hanoi summit, it's becoming clearer that we shouldn't expect a major breakthrough in negotiations. Instead, what we are going to see this time is actually a small deal, so-called small deal, in which North Korea is going to, it's not going to go all the way to a full denuclearization, but probably remain within the denuclearization framework that they stated back in Singapore, which is concerning the 3 major named facilities that North Korea have right now, such as the Yangbyun nuclear facility, Punggye-ri nuclear test facility, and the Dongchang-ri missile test facility. I think North Korean concessions will remain within that list. And in exchange, the United States, depending on what North Korea offers on the table, puts on the table, United States is going to give North Korea economic concessions. I don't think it's going to go all the way to full-fledged dismantlement of the sanctions regime, but instead, the United States is likely to offer some incentives here and there, for instance, facilitating the restart of some of the inter-Korean economic exchange projects, such as the Myong-hyun project. So probably that'll be the limit, will be the overall picture of the deal that's going to be made in Hanoi.
All right, so you're not really expecting a breakthrough deal from this summit.
Well, that could happen. We are talking about a face-to-face meeting between the two leaders. The working assumption here is that in a country like North Korea, the word from the top leader, that's what that matters the most. So depending on how Kim Jong-un is predisposed to going to, engaging in this kind of a major maximalist deal with the United States, a breakthrough is still a possibility. But then I would say, also at the same time, North Korea is very careful and conservative when it comes to dealing with the outside world. Therefore, the most likely scenario is a small deal, quote unquote, not a maximalist breakthrough that some people expect.
Because we are expecting the two sides to meet again, even after the second summit in Hanoi. So obviously, that's a point that we have to consider on. But there have been a lot of talks over how the two sides might actually reach a joint political agreement on officially ending the Korean War. So at this point, we're wondering how significant would a peace treaty be between the two sides? And also, could this be considered a strategic victory for North Korea, perhaps?
If the two sides, United States and North Korea, reach such a major agreement, such as signing the peace treaty, even before North Korea denuclearizes, even partially, that'll be a major victory for North Korea for sure. Even though it's just a piece of paper, some people might think that way, but then it has legal ramifications for the status of the U.S.-ROK alliance. But then peace treaty is actually going too far for now. What's being mentioned right now is signing a declaration to end the war, which is a totally symbolic gesture. And technically speaking, the Korean War has ended back in 1953. There's an armistice agreement between the two sides, governing the status of the relations between the two Koreas and the United States and other countries that participate in the war. So therefore, signing the declaration to end the war has still some implication for domestic policies here in South Korea, but it's not going to affect the status of the U.S. ROK security alliance for now. So that's something that the United States can give to North Korea as a goodwill gesture, and that could happen. But then, again, at the same, it doesn't mean that the two sides are going to sign a peace treaty today or tomorrow or day after.
Right. It's not
kind
an
of going
easy deal.
off on that, the South Korean, the Blue House spokesperson actually said something very similar too, and that's one of the reasons why we can actually expect a declaration of the end of the war might actually happen, because Kim actually said when asked about it, he said, well, it's a possibility. The declaration itself is absolutely a possibility, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. Just earlier, Seoul actually said a declaration of end of the war should at least include the two Koreas and the U.S. So it's kind of a different stance now. But what they are saying is that basically he's saying Seoul and Pyongyang technically have already reached that agreement when they signed the military agreement last September when President Moon visited Pyongyang. And he said Seoul and Beijing and Washington and Beijing, they already practically reached that agreement too when they established and normalized diplomatic ties way before, like a long time ago. So that's what the Blue House is saying, is that it's only the U.S. and North Korea that needs to sign this declaration. But he did, however, he drew the line saying, as you said, the declaration is not, it's not the same as a peace treaty. A peace treaty is much more complicated. It involves much more countries, and because again, it has to guarantee the security there in the region too. So again, it's much more complicated, and Kim Jong-un said it's probably going to come at the last stage of the denuclearization process of the Korean Peninsula.
All right. Now, at this point, some of us are wondering, what is really driving these two countries to a level of reconciliation that we haven't seen in over decades? I mean, it was unthinkable, right?
Yeah, it was very surprising that I was especially witnessing a sitting U.S. president sitting, face to face with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. That was very surprising, but even to us, in many ways, that such a thing could happen very quickly. But at the same time, going into it, I think there's such this outcome. Actually very unique to the fact that the current U.S. President Donald Trump has a different opinion about the leaders of a so-called rogue states such as North Korea or like Russia or China. And I think Donald President Trump thinks that more than anybody else, more than any one of his predecessors, he thinks that diplomacy should be conducted in a personal manner rather than based on a very careful policy thinking. So I think that really allowed him to go beyond the positional criticism at home of our meeting with the leader of North Korea, which from many in the United States actually criticized by saying that it's actually rewarding by just for the fact that a sitting U.S. president meeting with a dictator from a country like North Korea is rewarding the dictator. And despite all this criticism, President Trump, I think, actually wanted to put a personal stamp on this. And I think in his mind, he has succeeded. He has succeeded. I think that's the reason why he's so confident that this process is going to be successful. That he thought that, probably he's thinking, not thought that, but he's thinking that the only difference that allowed Donald Trump to be in this kind of at this stage of a negotiation with North Korea, unlike anybody else before him, was because he was willing to take the risk of sitting across the table from a leader from a country like North Korea. So I think that's the reason why we are seeing this right now.
Right, and Trump has repeatedly talked about how he has a very good relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, so obviously that plays a big role in there. Now, what topics then, other than obviously North Korea's denuclearization, would the two leaders, or could the two leaders, discuss during their summit?
Well, denuclearization is going to be the meat of the discussion, obviously, and that's the reason why the two are in Hanoi and they met in Singapore 8 months ago. But I think beyond that, they can discuss about related issues such as the peace treaty or but like, as we mentioned before, it's too advanced and too soon to talk about peace treaty. But definitely they can talk about declaration to end the war. They can also talk about attendant issues such as sanctions, how the sanctions are making an impact on the North Korean economy. As far as we know, there's like a North Korean official in charge of economy right now in Hanoi. I think the reason why he's there is because he probably wants to explain to his American counterparts that the sanctions are having a very negative impact on the North Korean economy and well, that's the intention of the sanctions after all. So that could be one, and therefore he wants to discuss about how to relax sanctions, and he probably wants to explore what will be the measures that the United States is willing to, relax at this moment. So that could be one, and then also they could talk about. I mean,
humanitarian issue. What about
humanitarian
those?
issue? Obviously, some people discuss about the possibility of President Trump raising the issue of human rights to Kim Jong-un.
And we also know that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe talked about Japanese abductees, right? And he asked President Trump to bring up that issue when he meets with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Do you think that will come up?
Well, I think in a roundabout way that's a possibility. But then we know back in Singapore there's a same set of demands on the part of the U.S. allies to put that human rights issue on the table. But then we know that President Trump didn't really raise it to Kim Jong-un, and it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be. I think President Trump is going to say, denuclearization is peace, and that's actually improving like other humanitarian issues.
It's actually interesting to see that because, as you said, it's a very touchy issue. The humanitarian issues in North Korea, it's an important issue. But again, for President Trump to actually mention that during the summit, it's a lot of pressure for him too. He time and time again called Kim Jong-un his friend, which is actually garnering some criticism around the world because of the humanitarian issues that are in lack in North Korea right now. But even today, actually just about an hour ago, Trump tweeted saying that if North Korea denuclearizes, the potential is, quote, awesome for his, quote, friend, Kim Jong-un. So again, when he calls someone a friend, but also pointing out the flaw of the country, it's going to be a lot of pressure, and I don't know if it's actually going to happen as you said.
Right. Now, Ho-jun, we know that President Moon Jae-in had played an important role as a mediator ahead of the two summits in Hanoi and Singapore. Well, Hanoi is about to happen tomorrow. But what is President Moon Jae-in's take on this summit, and what are his expectations?
Well, as we said, again, the declaration of end of the war is definitely one of the things that President Moon really wants to see happen. He actually also said that recently he mentioned this new term called the New Korean Peninsula Regime, basically saying he is not going to sit out of this entire process. He's going to take the lead. South Korea is going to be taking charge of this whole new process that's actually happening in the region. It's definitely a new geopolitical dynamic change that's actually happening here right now. And with President Trump now talking to Kim Jong-un in Hanoi right now, he will be eager to hear about the results and go from there. Actually, President Moon and Trump actually held a phone conversation last week in which President Moon proposed to his U.S. counterpart to resume joint inter-Korean economic cooperation to speed up the process of denuclearization. He actually said that the joint economic cooperation will speed up denuclearization. And it's interesting because President Moon asserted that South Korea is, quote, determined to take up the role if President Moon asks if that's the way to lessen the U.S. burden. So he proposed this cooperation to President Trump, and apparently President Trump responded positively to that proposal. So as the professor mentioned, the Blue House is cautious, yet they are hopeful that the summit in Hanoi will possibly lead to easing of sanctions against North Korea, and which would lead to the economic cooperation between the two Koreas. And President Trump, obviously, he promised President Moon to give him a call once the summit is done to update him on the results. And he even talked about a possible face-to-face meeting with President Moon. I mean, to discuss further matters on this issue. So right now, the Blue House didn't really specify any specific dates, but they're actually looking into arranging this one-on-one meeting with President Trump.
All right. Now, we thought Kim Jong-un might stop by Beijing to meet with his Chinese counterpart before arriving in Hanoi, but he didn't. So, I mean, at this point, we're wondering, how involved do you think China is in all this, especially considering that China is one of the closest allies to North Korea?
Well, definitely China is very involved. It's backing up North Korea's initiative when it comes to denuclearization negotiations. There's no doubt about it. But then at the same time, we should dispel the notion that China is the mind behind Kim Jong-un, that actually telling Kim Jong-un what to do and that kind of stuff. China is not the master of North Korea, clearly, but then definitely a very helpful ally. We can tell that from the fact that China allowed Kim Jong-un to travel to Vietnam by train, crisscross the country of 1.3 billion people, north and south, so disrupting travel schedules to millions of Chinese people.
Right.
So that was an amazing way of showing support for Kim Jong-un. And so I think definitely China would like to be involved in the process. And I think the best way to show courtesy to China from North Korea's point of view is to pay a visit to Xi Jinping and then share what about the contents of the negotiation and whatever agreement that United States and North Korea might reach in Hanoi. So it's still a possibility that Kim Jong-un might drop by Beijing on the way back.
Right.
On the way back, if he travels by train, but very very likely soon after that if he doesn't visit Beijing this time. So I think. When it comes to the relationship between China and North Korea, we should have any doubt that the two are very close.
Right. I mean, we've seen very close coordination between China and North Korea ahead of this Hanoi summit, so we'll definitely expect more cooperation in that part. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Absolutely.
My pleasure.